Hello and welcome to today's show. As you can see, this is actually an in-person interview. Today I am joined by Felicitas Onetti, and we actually both met at the Given Forum last month in June in DC. And we were both speakers at this women's conference, and we were able to share our story and just interacting with Felicitas. I was just so blown away by just her passion for an important work that she does, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes. But just her sincerity and just you're a beautiful woman, both inside and out.
Thank you.
And so I'm just so glad that it worked out for us to record here in person. And so, yeah, so welcome to all those who are listening. And just as a little background, can you share a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I work for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and I work in the Department of Migration and Refugee Services, where I oversee the anti-human trafficking portfolio for the church and the greater body of bishops here in the United States. Um, so we cover a variety of different topics, but pretty much oversee human trafficking overall. It's the umbrella at the international and national level.
So when you say human trafficking, I remember on the panel you shared that there are many facets of it. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, sure. So I always like to phrase it, which I think is how I explained it to you, was human trafficking is what I would like to see in my head as an umbrella term. And we have these kinds of different pillars where we have child trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, maritime trafficking, and kind of other, online exploitation. And then sometimes they all blur together, but they usually kind of divide for the most part. And so you have experts in different fields that maybe just focus on child sex trafficking or child labor trafficking or just child trafficking, right? Um, and it kind of varies within groups or ethnic groups, different issues. We have a lot of migration related issues with labor trafficking or sex trafficking. So it kind of it gets more expansive as it goes on, but that's kind of the overall overarching view of what it looks like.
So how long have you been in this position and what drew you to this work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an immigrant from Argentina, and I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I started working with migrant farm workers in South Florida, and I really just I think felt the Lord called me, I think, to work with this vulnerable community. And considering, both of us were immigrants, but they were considered migrants and were way more discriminated and, judged and mistreated. The only difference was that I had, a lot of privileges that they didn't have to come to this country legally. And so I started working with those children and families within that capacity. And then I went to university in Washington, D.C., and I studied social work there. And then I pursued my master's in clinical social work, where I really focused working with family violence specifically and child welfare related issues. And I was doing some research with an institute in my master's program where I worked in a women's prison, in a federal prison. And then I worked in a substance use rehabilitation kind of inpatient program where there was women there. And with all of those kinds of categories, it's like in all these different co-occurring issues, whether it was domestic violence in the home or whether it was, substance use disorders or working with female inmates, it all just led back, or migrants, it all just led back to human trafficking and the victimization of those groups in different forms. And some of it looked different, but some of it looked the same. And a lot of the people I was serving, one was being exploited for labor work and another was being, sexually abused and sexually exploited. And they all kind of, it was just everywhere, right? It was everywhere in the work that I was doing. And so I was an intern for the US conference when I was in university. And then when I moved back to DC, this position was open. So I've been here for probably almost 3 years now. But I was working in this capacity, prior to that. So it's been a great joy in some ways, right? And being able to serve this community. And it's definitely, I think, where I've found kind of my role to serve and whatnot.
So you say it's a great joy, but as I hear you, like my heart is breaking about the different groups you're speaking of, and I'm like, how do you remain hopeful and joyful and like and just hearing these stories?
Yeah, I think that it's such a conflicting feeling. I think it's joyful to be able to kind of dedicate my life to this mission. I don't, um, I don't think there's another purpose where I belong, and I think the Lord has kind of called me to serve this community, and that's a joy in the sense of serving kind of this fulfilled mission and whatnot. But then the contradicting feeling of hearing these horrible stories and seeing just the kind of hurt and hatred that people can do to one another, and people using each other as commodities. But there's always hope that there's better, right? And I think I shared this at Gibbon, but I find some strange comfort in knowing that Jesus weeps with me when we see these people suffer, and he looks at them with pity, and I, he does the rest, right? I do these things, and it's not about the work that I do, right? I'm doing this in the comfort of a desk, and the real people that should be glorified are the victims and survivors, and the Lord does kind of the rest of that healing, right? Or tries to, or however that kind of looks. But I think that, I mean, if we don't stay hopeful, then what's the point of all of it, right? It's just the hope that this will be eradicated, and the hope that people will treat each other with respect, and the hope that abuse and neglect and all forms of violence kind of just vanish, right, in some form. And because it is so hopeless, that doesn't make me feel like I should just give up on such an important mission. Um, yeah, I hope that, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us a little, just a bit more about the work, like on a day-to-day basis? What does it look like?
Sure, yeah. So our office handles more of what we would call macro kind of social work, so more policy related advocacy, prevention, and education, and a lot of just research and kind of different forms of education that we provide to the greater church audience, as well as parish goers, right? People, just general Catholics in the pews, schools and organizations, and collaborating with that, doing different missions on different projects, such as we're working on some stuff we work a lot closely with migrants, right, in the southern border, and the issues that we see there, and working with a few great priests on specifically Native American communities and indigenous populations in the United States, and those kinds of vulnerabilities that are exacerbated. So it's I get the day to day can be really fast or really slow, and there's just a variety of projects that are always kind of being worked on, and I wish I could just have octopus hands and do it all, but we slowly kind of are getting our way there, and really just trying to kind of raise awareness and implement prevention programs in schools and kind of parishes and all around, especially for the Catholic community, as we are such a strong institution, and being able to support victims and survivors, and prevent the crime from even happening.
So, like, hearing you speak, I think of, so we have a young son, and I'm just like, I pray this never happens to him. I mean, God forbid,
Sure.
But like, what can a parent do, or what can a friend, or just to prevent?
Sure.
In any way?
Yeah, I think that these conversations, people, I don't know, I think it's just a greater society. We tend to not talk about violent things or scary things, because, I mean, it's not a dinner conversation sometimes, right? There's a time and place. But we need I think it's kind of like what people say of, like, the greatest lie ever told was like, or the greatest secret ever was that the devil doesn't exist, right? However the saying goes, that by not talking about him, it's like more, that's what he wants, right?
Yeah.
And when we don't talk about the evils of the world, it doesn't help. It just keeps it, more silent. If anything, we're helping perpetrators continue to victimize communities and continue to, misinform and perpetrate, right? To be more evil. But when we have conversations and really, in healthy parenting, or in a place with understanding and compassion, and with good intentions, as education, there would never be something you would do wrong, right? And when we talk about the realities of the world, we can do so with grace, and we can do it in a way that is digestible to people. And so I think as parents, the best way to do, or to prevent, right, from your kid from ever being, victimized in any sort of form of violence, or if we think of even bullying, right, it's, teaching our kids to be nice, and always creating a space where they can tell us, I'm not a parent, so not us or you, but where they can tell you, hey, mom, that, this happened at school with this kid, what do I do?
Mm.
Or, hey mom, I think the biggest struggle now is like everyone has phones, right? And as they get younger, phones get to them easier. And so having those conversations, right? Listen, we're going to give you this phone, and with this phone comes responsibilities, and with responsibilities, like these are the things you need to do. If you're ever unsafe online, let us know and we'll help you through it. And I think when people, children are extremely exacerbated online. And so it's not even so much about, okay, they know I can tell mom, hey, this weird person messaged me. But sometimes when they do get manipulated, and let's say they do send an explicit image, they're so ashamed and guilty or embarrassed, right? And perpetrators lure them to do those things to then say, oh, you're so embarrassed. If you don't give me more images, I'm going to send it to your parents. I'm going to send it to your whole family. And so you want to be the one to say, you want your kid to be like, I messed up. Like, I did this thing. I don't know why I did it. I wanted to do it, whatever the reason is. But I did this thing and I need your help, right? And kind of creating that place where the shame and guilt and embarrassment maybe doesn't feel so strong. Or maybe it's, maybe it's still prevalent, but you're there accompanying them through them.
Yeah.
Because those tactics are being used by perpetrators to continue that manipulation. And so if we break those barriers, they'll say, I'm embarrassed, but I know that my mom will help me, right? Or I know that my dad will help me. Or the family, right? My aunt will help me with this thing or whatever it is. And kind of breaking those stigmas, right? Breaking those barriers. I think we see it a lot with like maybe a kid in high school that drinks underage. And instead of calling their parent, they, I don't know, sleep at a friend's house. And it's like, I'm sure a parent would always say, well, I would want to know, no matter how mad I'll be or how upset I'll be or any of those things. You want to be the first one.
Yeah.
And so kind of creating that dynamic, we can put all the parental controls on phones and internet, and things will always happen. And so creating a space where that can be communicated, I think, is more of the key and the way that we should be framing that protection.
That makes sense. So just through your experience and the stories that you've heard, what are, I guess, some stories of breakthrough of people getting out of being exploited, or just in just really situations where like only God can help? And God, I mean, obviously God's like worked through.
Sure.
Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I mean, there's so many stories out there, and there's so many survivors that write about their experiences. So I always encourage people to go online and just Google some of that stuff. And we have a book, like a book club list for people interested in that, or movie list as well, to kind of see what that looks like. But I think the breakthroughs really are when we break down that barrier that I was mentioning. A lot of times when what we see with victims, whether that's I'll give you two examples. So I'll start with like sex trafficking specifically. A lot of the issues when it comes to like persecution in the United States, or criminalizing, perpetrators, we end up criminalizing the victims, right? The women, for prostitution or for kind of different, methods. And a lot of times what we see is because they've been instilled that fear, right? That no one's going to help you, right? If you tell them he's going to kill you, or if you, you're going to get arrested because you committed this crime for me, right? And so these co-occurring issues that kind of bottle up. And so they are afraid, right? They are afraid to, no one's helped them before, right? This is probably a lot of times what we see with specifically victims of sex trafficking is like just, childhood abuse as well. And so running away from home, or running away from, these ills at home, to someone that is giving them what they don't have, right? And so when we can't, I think that the best method to kind of help survivors is giving them what perpetrators are giving them, right? So if we say, we're ready to help you, but we don't have a house for you, or like we don't have shelter. In an example, right? They go to a social worker and they say, I need help. And then we say, oh, well, we don't have enough beds for you, like a bed for you tonight. What are they going to do, right? They're going to go back to the perpetrator. And so when we don't provide the things that are being provided for them by perpetrators, whatever that may be, food, shelter, love, kind of all those kinds of things, it's like, for them, it's easier to go back to those situations. And as well, asking, I think what we've seen in the breakthrough of survivor experiences is, there's been so many times that a police or a teacher or someone has, encountered a situation that they would maybe say, are you okay? Like, what's going on? But nothing ever happens, right? And so it's just kind of this constant lack of help and lack of resources. And then never in those processes, do people say, how are you? Are you safe? Um, I was talking with some people that were saying, even when I was interviewed with like law enforcement, they're saying they're trying to get the trafficker, and they're not even worrying about the victim that's in front of them. They're trying to like, close this like sting operation. So they're trying to get all this information from the victim for the perpetrator, and the victim's like, you're using me the same way, they were using me. Like you're just trying to get information from me. You're not asking me, how am I? What do I need? And so, because I sense those kinds of barriers, and I think those are the biggest breakthroughs, or the things that we've learned in the past, right? Especially from, survivor experiences and task forces. They're all over in the implementation of legislation. There's a bunch of survivors that advise on these things, and that seems to be the biggest kind of barrier sometimes, right? If all these people missed these signs, and then now someone's asking them for something, and no one's asking how you are.
Yeah.
You kind of are just like rejecting,
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that makes sense for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So then what about like for the average person who who doesn't encounter, or maybe there are people that we encounter on a daily basis, but we don't even know that are in those situations. But what can we do to?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of ways, right? I mean, prayer always. We should always be praying for victims, for survivors, for healing, for even, praying for perpetrators, right? to change their ways, to see the light, to, realize that they're hurting people and exploiting people, and praying for them as well, because they were probably also abused and they were also mistreated. And so, what are the root causes and stuff? And I think this topic can be so daunting because people get really fired up, right? They're like, this is a horrible crime, which it is, and I want to do something. And a lot of times there's kind of that difficulty because, we can't, let's say, recommend you, Valentina, to go work with trafficking survivors the way you would go to a soup kitchen or something, right? There's very different levels of trauma. And so survivors, when they're getting treatment, they're usually in, undisclosed facilities because perpetrators they can't find them, right? And so they're working with social workers that are, very certified in kind of this work. And so it can be hard for the common folk, let's say, to engage in the ways that they want to. And so, I mean, prayer always, I think was always at the top of that. And I think really engaging at your local community, right? Like, encouraging your parish to talk about these kinds of things more. Talk about this stuff with your friends, with your family, sharing resources. And then even more so, hey, I live in this neighborhood, and I don't really see that there's like a safe community park, like a safe outlet for children. Maybe we start to kind of create that community, talk to our local leaders and say, maybe is there funding for a local park that is safe, that is protected, that is for the people in this neighborhood or something like that, right? Another way is, hey, I noticed that the closest food pantry is 100 miles away. There might be someone in the house next door that's being trafficked that doesn't have food. Maybe if we did like a local food pantry that was, within a 20-mile radius of us, that we could give food to anyone, right? Not necessarily just victims or survivors, but when the exact reasons that make people at risk, vulnerabilities like poverty, unsafe housing, right? All these kinds of the general vulnerabilities for anyone, right? The same risk factors, like we have to form the protective factors, right? And so when we form these protective factors, we kind of diminish these risk factors a little bit, right? Okay, our parish, we could do a really great education on human trafficking and put posters and put PSAs and whatever, share resources. Maybe someday someone walks by and they say, oh, I think I'm this person. And so there is a lot that we can do at our, kind of local level. A lot of our parish, or a lot of the people that, we work with and stuff, do Stations of the Cross for victims of trafficking. And so we have, the USC has like a document for it. So I'd be happy to share that
Yes,
with you
please.
and the
Yeah.
viewers and stuff. And um, Saint Josephine Bakita is our patron saint for victims of trafficking. She was a Sudanese woman, and she was a slave for most of her life and was trafficked. And she has a horrible kind of childhood experience, but her whole thing is forgiveness, right? And hope, that hope. And she was like, if I was never kidnapped, I would have never met God. What a testimony to love and mercy. And so her feast day is on February 8th, and the church at large, specifically from the Vatican's office, does an event around this. It's called the World Day of Prayer, specifically the World Day of Prayer on victims of trafficking. And so, hosting something at your local parish to raise awareness, doing something in your home, right? And saying, we're going to watch a movie on this topic, and then we're going to talk about it as a family. So doing more of those kinds of activities. There's a lot of events throughout the year. January is Anti-Trafficking Awareness Month. So the government, at the national level, so the government does a whole kind of advocacy and awareness around that. So there's a lot that we can do. It might not be, putting on a vest and joining the police and doing a sting operation as people want to do, but there's more tangible ways that we can, spread the love and serve.
No, those are very great examples, practical things.
Mhm.
So thank you. You've given me a lot of ideas of things to do,
Yeah.
especially next year. So I'm going to just switch gears just a little bit, and I would just love to hear about your faith journey. Were you always Catholic? And just like
Sure, yeah. So I'm from Argentina, and I mean you have more of the South American kind of like traditional Catholicism instilled in our culture, and both my parents were Catholic, and I did all my sacraments and whatnot. But I wouldn't say that we weren't really going to mass as a family. These kinds of practices weren't instilled so much in my, I guess, day-to-day life. I wasn't a cradle Catholic, right? Is what they call it. Yeah. And then when I always say the Holy Spirit just, chose me or something, and kind of picked me out and led the way. But I definitely didn't know, what God was and what the difference was. And, you have these ideas, kind of overarching ideas, because you go to Mass on Christmas, but it wasn't very much of a maybe practice in my family, but there was always reverence, right, for Mary and kind of having traditional statues or things like that. But there wasn't more of that conversation in the family unit. And I think I just, I went to, in high school, I went to a Catholic high school, and we had a lot of retreats, a lot of like youth ministry retreats and things like that, which I was a part of. And I really started to serve in high school with migrant communities there. And I just saw, Jesus' face in the poor, and I couldn't unsee it. And I didn't understand, right? I didn't understand maybe what that looked like. And a lot of the people I went to Catholic school, maybe grew up cradle Catholic and were very strong in their faith. And I wasn't there, but I knew that he was there. And I still maybe didn't know what that looked like. But I just remember one time going on one of these retreats, and I was just like praying and, kind of staring at the cross, and just like a wave of love kind of fell over me, and I like dropped to my knees, which I was on my knees already in the pew, but kind of like fell to the floor. And I knew that his love was so overwhelming, and that he saw me, right? And that I was his daughter. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with all this, but we're going to figure it out. And I went to confession, and it was just such a gift. And I think from there, it's been, kind of those ups and downs, and as life kind of goes, but just really relying on knowing that I was like a daughter of Christ, right? And knowing, I think, him putting me in these places of this, serving ministry was where I was meant to be. And when I say that, I don't mean it as like, my mission is, this isn't about me, right? This is so not about me. This is all about, victims and survivors, and this is all about him, healing. And I'm just, purely an instrument of God. And, people always ask me, how do you deal with this and like stay smiling? And I'm like, this is not about me, I'm doing this in the comfort of my desk, and, there's someone being exploited as we talk, and, it's not about it's just, it's all his, I think. And then my faith just constantly grew. And I think one thing I will say is, even if I didn't understand a lot of things, I always looked to the saints. The saints, like, just always guided me. And I read a lot. I'm an avid reader, and I just read about the saints, and I loved Mother Teresa and Saint Teresa of Lisieux and San Filippo Neri, and I mean Saint John Bosco, and all of these saints that I loved to serve. Right, that was their thing, and I was like, I feel like I'm a groupie here a little bit, like I really just resonated with their writings, and I really just was like, this is what it means to be a Catholic. This is like what we're called to, um, Jesus, like, this is what he would do if he was here. If he came today, he would be in the prison. Yeah. He would be with the migrants. He would be at the substance abuse rehabilitation. He would be with victims of trafficking, right? And he would be with all of us in very different ways, but he would be at like the core of all of these things. And I just wanted to be where he was. And I just didn't look back. I just loved it. And I loved, and that's, I mean, that it's like, it's such a joy, because although there's so much suffering, it's just like he's suffering with me at the same time. And we're doing it together. Yeah. And I can do it through his strength, right? Because it's not about me. So it's truly just like him and the Holy Spirit being like, go this way, and here I am.
Oh my gosh, that's so inspiring. And just such a good reminder that, the saints are there, and that we should, like, not only learn about them, but ask for their intercession.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Just what a great example. They've gone ahead of us,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, oh my gosh, and they're just such great examples of, like, to the core of, like, what it is to be Catholic. And there's so many, right? And there's so many different ways that it's happened, but I think that was just, like, so beautiful. Growing up and having these examples of, of common folk, right? To then become saints and be these incredible people sitting, next to the Father.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a random question. So we're all called to be saints.
Sure.
So God willing, when you are in heaven one day and I'm right there with you, what do you want to be the patron saint?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. I don't even know. Maybe I feel like that all the saints have already covered all the bases, so I don't even know.
You could. There are multiple saints with multiple sins. So I think it's okay.
I don't know. Maybe the patron saint of student loans. Or something. I don't know. I think maybe like a patron saint of, like, like of service, or of like, I don't know, conviction maybe, or just kind of, feeling left out because you didn't grow up so Catholic, but still knowing you're kind of going somewhere, that, like, your desire is kind of like Saint Teresa of Lisieux, right? Having this, like, childlike love for God, and that can be enough.
Yeah.
And we should learn and evolve and stuff, but I don't know, maybe something like that, or I don't know.
No,
I have to think about it. I know, I'm just gonna put you on the spot.
It should be. Oh, I don't know. It's so much easier to ask the questions.
I'm looking in the mind. It's not crazy, but
the patron saint of laughter.
Okay, yeah.
He's having a bad day.
Like, things that I've seen.
I'm like, I got you.
Yeah, and you just like tickle them. Exactly. I love that. That's good. I like that. I don't even know. I'll have to think about it. I'm gonna think about it, and I'm gonna email you, and then you're gonna write it up in the.
I don't know why I just thought of that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, what would you want to be kind of remembered?
Yeah. Oh, okay. One last question. You mentioned that you're an avid reader. What are you currently reading?
So I'm currently reading. It's not a Catholic book.
No.
But I'm reading Lessons in Chemistry.
Okay.
It's fiction, but there's a show on it.
Okay.
There's a show, on Apple TV. There's like a doctor, kind of like a one season, like a short series on it, but it's a fiction, and basically in the 50s, and she's a scientist, she's a chemist, and kind of all the issues with not being recognized as a woman, and they never give her like the right to be a chemist, and because she doesn't have her PhD, but she has her master's, which is already rare at that time, and she doesn't have her PhD, but there's reasons she didn't get her PhD by being like discriminated and kind of abused in the workplace and things like that. So it's an interesting read. But yeah, that's what I'm reading right now, kind of taking my mind off of some things. Yeah. But I do read a lot of like Facebook, books and stuff too.
No, I just like to ask that question because I like to read too. So I'm always looking for good, especially good fiction. I feel like it's hard to find good fiction that's like funny and lighthearted, but not just like goes off the deep end,
Exactly. No, and this author, she's really funny. I now I can't remember her name, so that's bad advertising. But but she's funny and witty, and it's really interesting. And I think the series is really good because I've been really liking it. Okay. So
nice.
Yeah.
Okay. As you were talking, I was like, I think I started it on like. I think I was gonna buy it, but I was like looking up the free, like 20 pages, and I was like laughing so hard on my phone just the 3 pages that I read. Yeah. So I never did finish it, but glad to know it's good.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. It's a good one.
Okay. Awesome. Well, as we wrap up, I guess are there any questions I didn't ask you or anything that you wanted to talk about?
I think I just something that I always kind of live by, I guess if that's helpful, is when just because we don't know about a topic doesn't mean that we can't talk about it, right? I think people now and like the kind of culture of these kinds of conversations is it's very important to know what you're talking about, especially when you're talking about critical issues, right? Or when we talk about human trafficking and maybe some of the myths and stereotypes that we hear about, and then we think that that's what it is. I always encourage people to read more about it, but to still not be afraid just because we don't know everything. To kind of contradict what I just said, to still talk about issues that are hard to talk about. And this I think Colossians 3:14 talks about clothe yourself in love and everything else. Out of all the virtues, clothe yourself in love and everything else comes together in unity. And when we do everything in the face of love, we can never do it wrong. Or we can, obviously, but intentionally. I think that when we approach these issues that are difficult with love, there's no wrong way to do it. And we can always learn from our mistakes or find different ways to do it. But I always just encourage people to not be afraid to talk about maybe stigmatizing topics, especially when it comes to the protection of our friends and family or even ourselves. And always ask for help, and hopefully you have that community that you can go to. And if you don't have that community, you can always start it, and to not be discouraged, and to kind of seek the intercession of the saints, and to give you that strength, and that remember that God kind of weeps with us also, and we're not alone in that suffering, especially when it's about other people and we're just like, what do we do? Like, how do we get through this? But I think Christ looks upon them, and He looks upon us, and that can also be enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're recording this on the feast day of St. Martha, and the readings today is Lazarus dying and Jesus weeping. So yes, he's very, very much present in our sufferings and the sufferings of others. He's not removed. He's not cold. He's there. And so even when, like you were saying, it feels like maybe he's not there, he's much more present than we can ever imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Felicitas, thank you so much. You truly are a joy, and thank you for sharing your story and about this work that you're doing. And I just encourage all those listening to just look into the resources you shared, and like she said, just let's all become more aware. And it's okay to not have all the answers, but it's more important to just not only clothe ourselves with love, but to have an environment, foster an environment within our friends and our family where people feel safe to just share about their experience.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
all right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
You're
It's
very
been such a pleasure.
Oh, great. And thank you all. And remember, when you say yes to God, you change the world. God bless you and see you next time.